Good afternoon, everybody. Just let me know if you all are hearing me properly. Thanks. Good afternoon, Cherise. All right, great. So I'm gonna start now. So basically, the last few sessions we have been talking about graphing linear inequalities, right? And last week we were talking about a topic called linear programming, right? So we went through two questions on how we treat with linear programming, right? Now we're going to come back to linear programming further down the road, right? In today's session, we're going to be talking about the quadratic function, all right? So let's begin. Now, previously we spoke a lot about linear functions. We said that a linear function is of the form y equal mx plus c, right? Where m represented the gradient and c was what we called our y-intercept, right? So we spent a significant amount of time looking at this. We looked at drawing linear graphs. I taught you all how to find the gradient of a straight line, how to find the y-intercept, right? So in today's session, we're going to be talking about something called the quadratic function, right? So a quadratic function looks something like this. It is of the form ax squared plus bx plus c, right? So for example, if you have a graph or a function that looks like this, f of x is equal to, let's say, 2x squared plus 3x plus 1. This is what we call a quadratic function, right? If I have something like this, f of x is equal to, let's say, 3x plus 2. This function here, the one on the right-hand side, right? That's this function here. This function is not a quadratic, right? This function is a linear function, right? Whereas the function on the left-hand side, this is a quadratic function, right? Now, if we have something like this, f of x is equal to, let's say, 4x squared plus 3x, right? This function is also a quadratic function, even though we are not seeing a constant term. And when I say a constant term, you see how we're saying that a quadratic function is ax squared plus bx plus c, right? C doesn't necessarily have to be there. So this function 4x squared plus 3x is also a quadratic function, right? Similarly, if I have something like this, f of x is equal to, let's say, x squared alone. Let's say just we have x squared alone. This function is also a quadratic function, right? So what really makes a quadratic function is that we must have an x squared term, right? So I want you to understand that first of all. A quadratic function doesn't necessarily need to have three terms. It must have the x squared term in order to make it a quadratic function, right? So let me show you some more examples here. So in this table, I'm trying to show you the difference between a quadratic function, right, versus what we call a linear function. So again, a linear function is always of the form y equal mx plus c, right? So this first one here, y equal 3x minus 1, this is a linear function, right? In this case, m is equal to 3 and c is equal to minus 1, right? This here, y is equal to x, is also a linear function. In this particular case, we do not have a constant, right? So in maths, when we talk about a constant, we're talking about a whole number here, right? A number. If we have something like y equals 6 minus 3x, this is also a linear function, right? In which case m is minus 3 and c is plus 6, right? So all of these are linear functions. Now if we go across to the left hand side now, we have the first one, y equal, this one here, y is equal to x squared plus x minus 6. This is a quadratic function, and it's a quadratic function because I'm seeing an x squared term, right? The second example, this is also a quadratic function because I have an x squared term, right? In this one here, again, I can see an x squared term here. Fourth one, we have 3x squared. This makes it a quadratic. Same thing for this and same thing for this, right? So you have to be able to look at an equation and tell me if it is a quadratic. All right? So let me just get a blank page. 1 second. Just go back to the beginning here. So let me ask you all something now. If I have an equation like this, y is equal to 4x plus 5, I want you all to tell me if it's linear or if it is quadratic, right? All right, so seeing several people saying linear, that's great. All right, Daryl, Josiah, Therese, right, good. I've seen Giselle saying it's a quadratic. No, it's not a quadratic because I don't have an x squared term, right? So this equation here is a linear equation, right? So it is not a quadratic, right? This is not a quadratic. If I have something like y equal to 2x squared plus 5x minus, let's say, 1, what type of equation is this? Is this linear or is it quadratic? All right, Shirish is saying quadratic, Josiah is saying quadratic. That is correct. So this here is a quadratic. All right. Just a note, I know I may have some students here who don't actually belong to my class, right? Anybody who is posting inappropriate comments on the chat, I will remove you instantly. All right, this is strictly for CSEC Maths, nothing else. All right, just keep that in mind. Now let's get back to this now. So this equation here is a quadratic. What about if we have something like this? X squared minus 9. What type of equation is this? All right, so you know, all of you say quadratic, right? So yes, it is a quadratic, right? So even though a quadratic function can be written as this: ax squared plus bx plus c, the thing is, b could be 0 and c could be 0, right? So the key thing to look for if something is a quadratic is the squared term, right? Let me ask you something. If I have a function that looks like this, f of x is equal to x cubed, sorry, let's say x cubed plus 2x squared plus x minus 1, right? So this particular equation here, right, is this equation a quadratic? It's okay if you don't know it, huh? It's fine. So I know some of you all going to get this wrong, right? All right, so let me just stop you all there for a sec now. All right, now even though, right, even though it has an x squared term, this is my x squared term, right, it also has a cubic term, right? This term here, a cube term, right? So this here, this function, right, it is not a quadratic. Now I want you all to remember something. I want you all to answer. If you all answer wrong, that is not a problem. This is the only way you're going to learn, right? So in this particular function, right, this is what we call a cubic function, right? So this function here is what we call a cubic function, right? So you're not going to meet this function in maths, right? At the CSEC Maths level we're talking about here, right? I just need you all to know that because you have an x cubed term, this makes it not a quadratic, right? So to be a quadratic, you must be of the form this: f of x is equal to ax squared plus bx plus c, right? Notice in this general form here, there's no x cube, right? There's no x cube inside that equation, right? So the highest power of x that I'm going up to is x squared, right? So let's look at something else now. So I've drawn a quadratic function here, and the function is given by this: 2x squared minus 7x minus 4, right? This is what the function is. Now you all need to know that when I draw a graph like this, it has a particular name. It is called a parabola, right? So some people will pronounce it differently, but it's called a parabola, right? So a shape like this, it's called a parabolic function, right? So a quadratic function is also called a parabolic function, right? You need to know this name because they can ask you this in the multiple choice exam, right? And you need to be able to identify a quadratic function if I give you a graph. So in the exam, if I were to just give you a graph, you should be able to tell me if it's a quadratic function or not, right? Now, let's look at something here. So remember, so keep this in mind, right? Keep this in mind. Quadratic function looks like this: ax squared plus bx plus c, right? Now, this coefficient here, which simply means the number in front of something, this a, actually tells me about the shape of the graph, right? That a tells me about the shape of the graph. Now, let's talk a little bit about coefficients, right? So let's look at this first one here. I have a function f of x, and it's given by 2x squared plus 3x plus 1, right? The coefficient of x squared, which means the number in front of x squared, is actually equal to 2, right? The coefficient of x squared is equal to 2. Alright, I just need to make sure you all understand what the word coefficient means, right? Is the number in front. So if I look at this second function here, right? This second function here, f of x is equal to 3x squared minus 6x plus 2. So the coefficient of x squared in this particular case here is 3. It's the number in front of the x, right? In front of the x squared, sorry. In the third example, we have f of x equal to x squared plus 2x plus 1, right? In this particular case here, the coefficient of x squared is 1, right? So some students, they miss this. You are not seeing a number in front of the x squared, but there's a 1 that is there. We don't normally write 1x squared, right? So 1x squared, we never write it as 1x squared. We usually write that as simply x squared. So when you do maths, you need to know that the coefficient in this case, the number in front of the x squared is 1, right? But we don't normally write it. Now, also, they can give you an equation, right? They can write the equation anyhow they want, right? Any exam, but you need to be able to figure out what the coefficient of x squared is. So look at this one here. I've written this equation slightly different. Right, f of x is equal to 1 plus 3x minus 2x squared, right? So in this particular case, we are looking at the coefficient of x squared. The coefficient of x squared is the number before the x squared, which includes the sign. So in this case here, my coefficient is minus 2. All right? Again, so I'm giving you sufficient examples so you understand what I'm saying. In this particular one, we have an x function, 3 plus x minus 3x squared. If we look carefully, the number in front of the x squared is minus 3. So therefore, the coefficient of x squared is minus 3. Alright? Again, the third one, we have f of x is equal to 1 plus 3x minus x squared. We're looking at the number in front of the x squared. Notice there's no number. So we will assume that it's a 1. So therefore the number in front of the x squared is minus 1. Right? So let me make sure you all understand this clearly. Yeah? Give me a sec. So let's make sure you understand this. So if I have f of x is equal to, let's say, 2x squared plus 5x plus 1, right? 2x squared plus 5x plus 1. I want somebody to tell me what is the coefficient of x squared. Alright, so I'm seeing everybody telling me 2, right? So we're looking at the equation. So the first thing you need to do, identify where is the x squared. This is the x squared here. So the coefficient is the number just in front of it. So this is 2. So therefore, my coefficient of x squared is 2. Now, since you all are experts about coefficient, can somebody tell me what is the coefficient of x? What is the coefficient of x? Alright, so seeing some answers coming in, people saying 5. So all you have to do, you need to identify where's my x term. This is x, this is where my x term is. So we're looking at the number just in front of it. And we must include the sign. Keep in mind, we must include the sign. So in this case here, our coefficient of x is plus 5, right? Let me give you an next one. Let's say I have f of x is equal to 2 minus 5x minus 4x squared, right? So I would like to get two things: coefficient of x squared, and also want the coefficient of x. All right, so the first thing I want, what is the coefficient of x squared? Alright, so Shirini is saying minus 4. Kadian is saying 4. Alright, now remember, we must include our sign. So, first thing, we need to identify where's the x squared term. This here is my x squared term, right? The number just before the x squared term is this here, which is minus 4, alright? Therefore, my coefficient of x squared is minus 4. It's not just 4, it is minus 4. Alright? Now, the second one now, I want to know the coefficient of x. What is the coefficient of x? Alright, so I seen Josiah saying minus 5, Darrell saying plus 5, Sharice also saying plus 5. So, before you can answer that, you need to identify where's the x term. So the x term is here. So the number just before the x term, we must include the sign as well. So it's minus 5. So my coefficient of x is minus 5, right? Now, so the coefficient of x squared tells me how the graph is going to look, right? So here's what you need to know. It's the first thing you need to know. If a is greater than 0, right, meaning that it's positive, the graph is going to be shaped like this. See how this graph is on the right hand side here? If a is positive, the graph is going to look like that. So for this particular function, the function was 2x squared plus 3x plus 1, right? Based on what I told you so far, the coefficient is 2. The number 2 is actually greater than 0. Number 2 is positive. So the graph is going to look exactly like what I've shown on the right hand side, right? So if I give you an equation, you should be able to tell me how the graph is going to look, right? That's just the shape of the graph. Now, to make sure you understand what I'm saying, there's a different scenario. What happens if a is negative, right? So look at what happens when a is negative. When a is negative, in this case here, oh sorry, this is a typo, right? This is negative, right? So when a is negative, the graph is shown like this. The graph looks like this. So for this particular graph, this function, right, was 2 plus 4x minus 3x squared, in which case my coefficient of x squared was minus 3, right? So because it's minus 3, that means it's negative. So the graph is going to look like what I have here, right? So depending on if a is positive or negative, the graph is going to look different, right? Now let me go back to this first graph here. So when a is positive, look at what's happening here. The graph looks like this, and what happens is that the graph has a minimum point, right? So the graph has a minimum point, right? What that means, that is the lowest value of this particular function, right? That's a minimum point. So this point here on your graph, it's called a minimum point. So keep that in mind, right? When a is positive, the graph has a minimum point. If I look at this graph here, when a is negative, right, the graph has what we call a maximum point. So this graph has what we call a maximum point, right? So if I give you an equation, you should be able to tell me if that equation or if that function is going to have a maximum point or a minimum point, right? So just to summarize what we say, right? Once we know the coefficient of x squared for a quadratic function, we will know if the graph is going to look like this. Let's call this a. We know the graph is going to look like this if a is positive. And this second graph here, we're going to call a b. The graph is going to look like this if a is negative. So simply by knowing the equation, you should be able to tell me how the graph is going to look, and you should be able to tell me if it's going to have a minimum point or a maximum point. All right? So just make sure you're all following. All right, so great. So you all understand the difference, right? Or you all saying you understand the difference. Let me give you something now. So if I give you a graph like a function like this, f of x is equal to, let's say, 2x squared minus 4x minus 1. I want to know, does this graph have a maximum point or a minimum point? Alright, so seeing Cherise, Grislin, you all saying it's a minimum point. That is correct. It's a minimum point, right? And how do we know this is by looking at the coefficient. You find the x squared term first. This is the x squared. And my coefficient in this case is 2. All right. So what that means is that a is greater than 0. Right. The coefficient of x squared is, we call it a. It's greater than 0, meaning that it's positive. Right. And it therefore has, this function therefore has a minimum point. Right? What about something like this? F of x is equal to minus x squared plus x minus 2. So the second function, all right, so I've seen practically everybody saying maximum point. That's correct. So in this case, again, look at the thought process. Find the x squared term. This is the x squared term here. The coefficient of x squared in this case, there's no number, so we know it's minus 1. So if it's minus 1, it means that a is less than 0, meaning that it's negative. Right? And if it's negative, it's going to have a maximum point. All right. So let's see how we're going to graph a quadratic function, right? Now in the exam, sometimes they give you a good few marks for this, right? They can come and they can ask you to draw a graph of the function, right? So look at this question here. They want us to draw a graph, and the function is f of x is equal to x squared minus 4x plus 3, right? That is the function. But sometimes they give us a piece of information here and they say for the domain minus 1. Now what this means is that x, the values of x that I'm going to use in the function, it goes from minus 1 to plus 5. So my domain, right? So remember we covered domain, codomain, we covered domain and range, right? So usually we have my domain is, you can think of it as your x values, right? Your domain is like your x values or the input to the function, right? So remember, you put those values into a function, and what happens is that something is going to come out of the function, right? So my input values in this case, how you're going to read this is that x lies between minus 1 and 5. So x, the domain in this case will be minus 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These are the numbers we're going to use in order to plot the graph, right? So make sure you understand the word domain. The domain gives us a guide as to what we're going to plug into the function, right? So first thing, make sure you understand what they are asking here. They want us to draw a graph of this function, right? That is the function, and they have given us the domain as being between minus 1 going up to 5, right? So here's how we're going to do this. That's not, let me get a blank page again. All right. So in order to draw the graph, right, we need to get some values for basically x and y. You need to get some coordinates in order for us to plot the graph. We already covered how we draw a straight line. All you need to draw a straight line, you need 2 points, right? But I told you all you should stick to using 3 points just in case you make a mistake in the calculation. All right. So here's what. So in the exam, typically what they do, they will give you a table that you will have to complete. So the table is going to look like this, right? You have x values on top here, and then you have f of x values at the bottom. So for those of you who don't know what f of x is, it's a function. I want you to think of f of x as your y values. Let's think of f of x as my y values, right? So don't get confused, right? F of x is the output of the function, right? And I know what the domain is. So the domain is -1 to 5. So in the exam, they will drop a table that looks like this. You have x values going from -1, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. What we need to do, right? We need to figure out what is f of x for each of these values here. In the exam, what they do, they fill out some of the values for you, right? But in this case here, I'm gonna work out each of the values. So here's how we're gonna do this, right? This is gonna take you a little time. So the first thing, we know what f of x is. F of x is x squared minus 4x plus 3. I'm going to work out this first one here. So I'm going to substitute -1 into the function. What that means is that anywhere I see x, I'm going to replace it and put -1. So look at something here. So I'm going to put -1 squared minus 4 by -1 plus 3. So all I'm doing, I'm replacing the x and I'm putting -1. Now, this particular one that I'm working out here is the one that students get trouble with. When they have a minus sign, right, in front of the number, they have problems, right? So watch carefully what I'm doing here. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to square the -1. -1 squared gives me 1, right? Then I need to work out this piece here. -4 multiplied by -1. That's what that means. -4 multiplied by -1. That becomes +4. Alright? And then we have +3 at the end. So this gives me 437 and 1, 8. Right? Which means that my first value here is 8. Right? So what we have to do this for all of them. So f of x is equal to x squared minus 4x plus 3. I'm going to substitute. My second value is 0. So I'm going to put 0 squared minus 4 multiplied by 0 plus 3. So 0 squared gives me 0. 4 by 0 gives me 0. And then plus 3. And this gives me 3. So this here is 0, 3. So here's what I want you all to do for me. I want you all to work out what is f of 1 for me. I want you to work out f of 1. Alright, so I'll give you 2 minutes to work that out for me and give me your answer. Alright, I see Sharice getting 0. Alright, so I see a few of y'all getting 0. Let's see. So we're working out f of 1, right? So first thing we need to do No, sorry, I missed out something here. This was f of 0, and this was f of minus 1. Alright, so f of x is x squared minus 4x plus 3. I'm going to plug in, we're going to use this value now. So we're going to put 1 squared minus 4 multiplied by 1 plus 3. So 1 squared gives me 1 minus 4 plus 3. So 1 minus 4 is minus 3, and minus 3 plus 3 gives me 0. Yep, so you all are correct. It is 0. So I want you all to work out now, what is f of 2? Alright, so I'm seeing people getting minus 1. See, Shiri's got, okay, Shiri's removed the answer. So we want to work out f of 2, right? So f of 2, it's going to be 2 squared minus 4 by 2 plus 3. So 2 2s are 4, right? That's when I square this. 4 2s, this gives me minus 8 plus 3. So 4 minus 8 is minus 4. Minus 4 plus 3 gives me minus 1. So this here has to be minus 1, right? So make sure you understand what we're doing here, right? We're trying to come up with some values that we can use to plot this function, right? So I want you all to work out f of 3 now for me. One second, somebody asked me what, wait sir, but a negative by positive is a negative. So, I'm not sure what you're asking here. Yeah, a negative number multiplied by a positive number gives me a negative number. Yeah. Alright, so what is f of Alright, so I've seen everybody saying, most people saying 0, right? So f of 3, let's go to this page here. F of x is equal to x squared minus 4x plus 3, right? I think that's the function. Yeah, and we work out f of 3. So you want to work out f of 3. So this is going to be 3 squared minus 4 by 3 plus 3. So this gives me 3 3s are 9 minus 12 plus 3. So 9 minus 12 is minus 3, and minus 3 plus 3 gives me 0. Alright? I need you all to give me f of 4. So we're going to put 0 here, and you need to work out f of 4 for me. Alright, so I've seen people getting 3 as the answer. Let's see. So we're going to substitute again. So this is going to be 4 squared minus 4 by 4 plus 3. 4 squared gives me 16. Minus 4 by 4 gives me minus 16 plus 3. And this will give me 3. So therefore, we're going to put a 3 here. Right? And the last one, we want to work out f of 5. So work out f of 5 for me. So f of 5. Alright, so I see some of you are getting 8. Let's see. F of 5, we're going to substitute 5 into the equation. So 5 squared minus 4 by 5 plus 3. So 5 5s are 25 minus 5 4s are 20 plus 3. So 25 minus 20 gives me 5. 5 plus 3 gives me 8. Right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to put 8 here. So let's go back to what the question is asking us to do. The question wants us to draw the graph. I can only draw a quadratic graph if I have a series of points, right? So what I'm doing here, I have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I have a total of 7 points. And what I'm going to do now, I'm going to use those 7 points in order to plot the graph. Okay? So make sure you understand the steps we're doing here to plot a quadratic function. So the first coordinate that we're going to plot will be minus 1 and 8. Right? That's the first point we're going to plot. So minus 1 and 8. So I have a graph paper here. So I'm going minus 1. So the first point we're plotting is minus 1 and 8. Right? So let me get all the values one time. So minus 1 and 8, 0 and 3. So this next one here is 0, 3. The next one is 1, 0. So this one is 1, 0. The next point is 2 minus 1. Next point is 2 minus 1. The next point is 3, 0. Now I'm getting all of this straight from my table, the table that I just completed. The next one here is 4, 3 and 5, 8. So the next one here is 4, 3 and this is 5, 8, right? So all of this here, I got it from my table, right? These are not numbers we just make up here. We get it from the table, right? So we start plotting each of those points. So the first one, this one here, is minus 1, 8. So I'm going to go to my graph and I'm going to plot the point minus 1, 8. Remember, the first value represents my x value and my second value represents my y value. So on my x-axis, I'm going to read off minus 1 and I'm going to go up to 8. So this point here is my first point. That's what I'm plotting, right? Yeah, so that's my first point. The next point I'm going to plot is 0, 3, right? Now pay attention to what I'm doing here. So my x value is 0 and my y value is 3. So this is my second point that I'm plotting. That's this point here, right? Then I'm going to plot the third point. I'm going to get, that third point is 1, 0. So 1, 0 is this point here. This is 1, 0, right? Then we're going to plot 2 minus 1. So 2 minus 1, the x value is 2 and the y value is minus 1. So I'm coming here. So this is 2 minus 1. The next point I'm going to plot is 3, 0. So 3, 0 is going to be this value here. That's this. Then I'm going to plot 4, 3. So 4, 3, my x value is 4 and my y value is 3. So this is my next value. And my next value here is 5, 8. So x is 5 and y is 8. So you're going to come up to this point here. Right? So I plotted all the points on the graph. Right? So let me ask. Right, so somewhere along the line you all should have known how to plot points on a graph, right? So once we plot the points, our next step now is to join these points using a smooth curve. Now I want you all to remember, when you all walk into your exam, your CSEC, actual CSEC exam, always walk with a sharpened pencil, right? Make sure the pencil is long, right? So a sharpened pencil, please, right? Those things are relatively cheap. So here's what you're going to do now. Once you plot the points, the next thing you have to do is to plot a smooth curve through these points. Alright? So I'm kind of trying my best here to draw this. Right? So you're going to draw a smooth curve. Right, you keep drawing. Right, now this has to be a smooth curve. Eh? It's kind of hard using what I'm using here to draw this graph. Right, so this is what the graph is going to look like. So this represents the function. So this graph is the function f of x. Right, just now. I won't be able to fit that here. So this represents the function f of x is equal to x squared minus 4x plus 3. So this is how we graph the function, right? We complete the table, and when we complete the table, we have a series of points, and this is how we plot the quadratic function. All right? So this is what the points look like plotted. This is when I plotted the points, and this is what the graph looks like. So this is the actual graph for that function. Right? So this is the graph with the smooth curve, right? So my question is, do you all understand how I was able to plot the graph? All right, so I'm seeing you all saying you understand, right? So this is a typical examination question, right? So I'm going to do a next one for you all to make sure you all understand clearly what we are doing here. So let's see. So here's what we want to draw this function. So the function is minus x squared plus 2x plus 2, and I've given you the domain as going from minus 2 to 4. Alright, so here's what I want you all to do. Using these domains here, I want you to work out what my f of x values are. So this is what the table would have looked like, right? So you're going from minus 2 straight up to 4. So I'm going to ask you all to work out f of minus 2 for me. So what is f of minus 2? Wow, seeing lots of different answers here. Let me wait to get some more answers. So keep in mind what the function is, right? So the function is f of x is equal to minus x squared plus 2x plus 2. All right? And you want to work out f of minus 2. So the negative ones are the ones that give students the most trouble. So you have to be careful with this. And the thing is, when you plot any graph, you'll know if you made a mistake, because when you try to plot the graph is going to look weird, right? All right, still waiting. What about I didn't see no answer from Josiah again, minus 2. What about Emily? All right, so this looks like I've given you all some trouble. All right, Emily got minus 6. I believe it's minus 6. So here's how we're going to substitute this, right? So you have a minus in front of the x squared, so we're not going to do anything with that minus. That minus stays right there. We're going to replace the x by minus 2. Then we're going to square that, and we're going to have plus 2 multiplied by minus 2 plus 2. All right? So all I've done there, I've just replaced the x and put minus 2. That's the only thing I've done there. So this minus sign is on the outside, so I'm going to leave that right there. Minus 2 squared gives me 4, because minus 2 multiplied by minus 2 gives me plus 4. And then we have 2 multiplied by minus 2, which gives me minus 4. And we're going to add 2. So minus 4 gives me minus 8. And minus 8 plus 2 gives me minus 6. So this here is actually minus 6. I hope you all understand how I got minus 6 there. Oh, so Shiri's got minus 6 as well, right? Alright, so one person saying they're not sure how we got that. So all I'm doing, right, just follow the steps I've done here. We are substituting minus 2 into this function here, right? So what that means is that anywhere I see x, I'm going to put minus 2. So I have minus x squared, right? If I'm substituting x, all I'm doing is I'm replacing the x with minus 2. Then I have 2x. So therefore, I'm replacing the x with minus 2. So you have to do this very carefully. So the first thing I did, I left this minus sign here. You can't do anything with it. Just leave it on the outside, minus here. Minus 2 squared is the same as, so minus 2 squared is the same as saying minus 2 multiplied by minus 2. And that gives me positive 4. So that is where this number came from. That's where this 4 came from. This sign, this minus sign, we didn't do anything with it. That is still there, right? The next thing we're working out is 2 by minus 2. 2 multiplied by minus 2 gives me, that's the same as saying 2 multiplied by minus 2, and that gives me minus 4. That's where this minus 4 came from. That's where this minus 4 came from here. And then we have plus 2. So minus 4 gives me minus 8, right? And minus 8 plus 2 gives me minus 6, all right? So please be careful with the minus signs. So the next thing I want now, I want f of 0. Alright, so I see lots of y'all getting 2. So we want to work out f of 0. Alright, f of 0 is easy to work out. That's minus x squared, so it's minus 0 squared plus 2 multiplied by 0 plus 2. So this is minus 0 squared gives me 0, 2 by 0 gives me 0, plus 2. So therefore this answer here is simply 2. So f of 0 is 2. I want you all to give me f of 1. Alright, so I've seen some answers coming in here. Majority of answers saying 5. Let's see. So we want f of 1, right? So f of 1 is minus 1 squared plus 2 by 0 plus 2. This is minus 1 squared gives me 1 plus 2 by 0 is 0 plus 2, and we're going to get, see what how you got 5, right? Did I make a mistake? One square is 1, 2 by 0 is 0. Oh, sorry, I made a mistake. This is 2 by 1, right? So 2 by 1 is 2. My bad. Alright, so 2 by 1 gives me 2. Everybody getting 5 soon. Minus 1 plus 2 gives me 1. 1 plus 2 gives me 3. Yeah, so the answer is 3. Alright, so I want you all to see this, that you have to be very careful when you're working on these questions. So the answer is 3. Alright. So this here, f of 1 is equal to 3. Alright. So what I want you all to work out now, what is f of 2? Alright, so I'm seeing some answers coming in here. I'm seeing Shri said 2, Del saying minus 6, Giselle saying 2. So be careful how you're substituting into the function. Alright, so you want to work out f of 2, right? So f of 2 will be equal to minus 2 squared plus 2 multiplied by 2 plus 2. So we don't do anything with the minus because it's outside the bracket. 2 2s are 4 plus 2 2s are 4 plus 2 minus 4 plus 4 is 0 plus 2 gives me 2. So the answer here is actually 2 as well, right? So what is f of 3? So Del is saying 4, Shri is saying 17. wait for some more answers before I work it. We got -1. So as you can see, there's a lot of different answers here, right? You all need to be careful. Somebody get -1. All right, so let me give you some insight here. So we want, what do we want now? We want f of 3. So f of 3 is equal to minus, we're not doing anything with the minus, it's 3 squared plus 2 multiplied by 3 plus 2. So this is minus 3 3s are 9 plus 6 plus 2. Alright, so minus 9 plus 6 is -3, -3 plus 2 is -1. Alright, so the answer is -1. So therefore we put in -1 here. I want you to work out the last one. We want to work out f of 4. Alright, I've seen some -6s. Daryl also say -6. So we work out f of 4, it'll be -4 squared plus 2 by 4 plus 2. So this is 4 4s are 16 plus 8 plus 2. So -16 plus 8 gives me -8, and -8 plus 2 gives me -6. Right? So -6 is the answer. So therefore this is -6. Right? So all we've done, we've completed the table. Right? That's the whole part of the question here. In your actual exam, what they typically do, you might have to work out maybe 2 or 3 values only. I'm making you work out all the values because, as you can see, students, they have problems when they're trying to complete this table, right? So the video will still be there online. So what you could do is, if you don't fully understand what I did, you can go back and review the video, right? It'll be there on my YouTube channel, and you can pause the video and try to see if you get any same answers that I got before. All right. So after you do all of this now, your next step is to plot the graph. Right? So the first thing, you need to know the coordinates that we're going to plot. So the first one is -2, -6. The next one is 0, 2. Alright. The next one is 1, 3. The next point is 2, 2, and 3 -1. So it's 2, 2, 3 -1, and then 4 -6. 4 -6, right? So I don't know if you all realize I kind of miss out -1 as a coordinate, right? But that's okay. So what do we do? We're going to plot the points. So the first point we're going to plot is this point here, which is -2, -6. So -2, -6, we're reading off the x value as -2, -6, that's down here. right? That's minus 2, minus 6. The next point we're going to plot is 0, 2. So 0, 2 is somewhere here. So 0, 2. Then we're going to plot 1, 3. So 1, 3 is this point here. Then we're going to plot 2, 2. So 2, 2 is this. Then 3 minus 1. 3 minus 1 is here. And then 4 minus 6 is down here. Right? So that's what we do. We plot all the points on the graph. Right? Now, what we're going to do now, in order to draw the graph, we have to draw a smooth curve through all these points. Right? So we know it's a quadratic. We know it's going to be a curve. It's not a straight line, it's a curve. Right? So, like I said, you're going to have to do this with a pencil. So your graph is going to look like this. Alright? So the final graph, right, the smoothened version of the graph looks like this. Right? So this is the graph of the function f of x equal minus x squared plus 2x plus 2. So I have drawn two quadratic functions for you all. Right? In one particular case, the first function had a minimum point, and in the second case, the function had a maximum point, right? Now, what was the next thing I was supposed to do? Just give me a second, right? Alright, so I've shown you how to draw a quadratic, right? Now let's talk about something now. We have something called a maximum point or a minimum point. And when you draw a quadratic, right? So let's say this is a quadratic here. Alright, this is a quadratic. This point here is going to be called a minimum point, right? So this is my minimum point, right? And that minimum point has a coordinate. It's going to have an x value and it's going to have a y value, right? That is what my minimum point is. Now, I want you to understand a property of a quadratic function is that it is symmetrical. And when I say symmetrical, it means that if I were to draw the graph, right, and I fold the graph along this line here, that green line, right, that green line is what we call my axis of symmetry, right? This is what we call my axis of symmetry, right? What that means is if I fold the graph along that dashed line, right, it's going to line up exactly, right? So think of that line as a mirror line. If I put a mirror along that line, I'm going to see an exact reflection in the mirror, right? So we have something called a minimum point and we have something called an axis of symmetry. In the exam, they can ask you what is your axis of symmetry, right? Now your axis of symmetry is always written as an equation. We say that the axis of symmetry is equal to some number, right? What we're going to call K in this case here, or C. It's some number. That's what my axis of symmetry is. So in the exam, when they ask you what is the axis of symmetry, you're going to say x equal to something. My minimum point has an x value and a y value. I can read that off directly from the graph, right? And if you notice something here, my axis of symmetry is actually whatever my x coordinate is. All right. Now, this is for a minimum point. The graph could also look like this. We just spoke about that. We spoke about the coefficient of x squared. So the graph could look like this. If the graph looks like this, then we have what we call a maximum point. Right? So when the graph looks like this, it has a maximum point. Also, the graph has an axis of symmetry again, because it's a quadratic. So this here is my axis of symmetry. Right? And again, the axis of symmetry is written as x equal to some number, right? And my maximum point is written as a coordinate. It's going to have an x value and a y value. All right? So, do you all understand what is a maximum point, a minimum point, and the axis of symmetry? Alright, so I'm seeing some yeses there, so I assume that you all... Alright, so let me see if you all really understand. Alright. So let me see if you all understand this. Look at this graph here. This is one of the graphs that we plotted. It's the first graph that we plotted, right? From this graph, can somebody tell me what is my minimum point? So my minimum point. What is my minimum point? By the way, this is how the exam question may look. After they make you draw the graph, they will say, hey, what is the minimum point? Now, I just said the minimum point is written as a coordinate, right? So I want you to give me a coordinate. So I see, all right, so Del is saying 2 minus 1, Emily is saying 2 minus 1. So we're looking for a coordinate. You need to give me two values, an x value and a y value. All right. So most of you all saying the correct thing. So my minimum point, you need to come to the graph, right? So this point here is my minimum point. That is the lowest point on my graph. So what you need to do, you need to read out the coordinates of that point. So look at it. The x value is 2 and the y value is minus 1. So therefore, my minimum point is 2 minus 1. I need to make sure everybody understands that. So my minimum point is 2 minus 1. All I'm doing is reading off the minimum point. My lowest point on my curve is 2 minus 1. And the minimum point is given as 2 minus 1. So that is one question they can ask you. They can also ask you this: what is the minimum value of f of x? Right? There's a question they can ask you. What is the minimum value of f of x? Now when I ask you for the minimum value of the function, I want you to give me one number, right? So I've seen some of you all have 2, some of you all saying -1. But let me just remind you all of something. Remember, at the beginning I said, think of f of x as being y. F of x is like the output of the function. So f of x is like my y values, right? So the answer is, so the minimum value so the minimum value of f of x is simply equal to -1. The answer is -1, right? That is the minimum value of f of x, right? So it's the lowest value. Remember, this function here is f of x. So the lowest value here is this. It's -1. That's my lowest value that the function f of x can take, right? Now, as we are talking about this here, they can also ask me what is the equation of the axis of symmetry. Alright, this is the next question that I can ask you. What is the equation of the axis of symmetry? Alright, so I'm seeing some answers. X equal 2. So what is the equation for the axis of symmetry? So my axis of symmetry, look at something here. this line here that I'm drawing here, the dashed green line, this line represents my axis of symmetry. Your axis of symmetry always passes through my minimum or maximum point, right? So my axis of symmetry here, it's always written as x equal to something. That green line passes through this point here, passes through the point 2. So therefore x equal 2 is my equation of my axis of symmetry. Alright? So that is what my axis of symmetry is. Now, since we're here one time, I'm going to teach you something that you need to know. Alright? Use the graph so this is an next exam question as well. Use the graph to solve x squared minus 4x plus 3 is equal to 0. That is an exam question as well, and you need to be able to know how to answer it. So use the graph to solve the equation x squared minus 4x plus 3 equal to 0. So for those of you who are actually in my class, when we did solving quadratic equations, we said, or I told you that there are basically 4 methods we can use to solve a quadratic equation. The first method is by factorizing, right? That's method 1. The second method is by using the formula, right? There's a big long formula that you all need to know. Or if you don't know it, it's on the formula sheet in the maths exam, which is x equal minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a, right? So that's the second method. The third method is by completing a square, and the fourth method is by drawing a graph. So we just looked at drawing a quadratic graph, so I'll show you how to solve a quadratic from this graph one time. So look at something here. My equation is x squared minus 4x plus 3, and that is equal to 0, right? So it's an equation we're trying to solve here. So this is my equation, x squared minus 4x plus 3 equal to 0. Now I want you to understand what you're really trying to do here. You are trying to find the values of x such that when I substitute it into the formula, my answer is going to be 0, right? Make sure you understand what I'm saying. I want to find the value or values of x such that when I plug it into that equation, my answer is going to give me 0. So here's how you're going to do that. My x-axis, right? My x-axis is also known as the line y equal to 0, right? This is my x-axis. This horizontal line is my x-axis. All I need to do is to look and see where does the graph cut my x-axis or the line y equal to 0. So let me get a different color here. So the graph cuts the x-axis at this point here, and it cuts the graph at this point here as well. So therefore, from my graph, I can just tell you what the solution is. The solutions to this equation are x is equal to 1 and and x is equal to 2, right? That is how we solve an equation like this. When they give us the function equal to 0, right? Like in this case here, the function is equal to 0. All we need to do is to see where the graph cuts my x-axis. And from this graph, it cuts at 1 and it cuts at 3. Oh, I still made a mistake here. This is not 2. So it cuts at 1 and it cuts at 3, right? So these are my solutions to this equation here, right? So these are things they can ask you in the exam, right? So just to make sure you understand how to do this, let me give you an X graph. The second graph that we drew, let's talk about that graph. So that's this one here. Let's go to so this is my graph. All right. So the first thing I want you all to tell me, what are the coordinates of, in this case we have a maximum point. So what are the coordinates of my maximum point? Remember, you have to give me a coordinate. Alright, so I'll wait to get some more answers. I've seen 1, 3. So all we're doing here, we're looking at the maximum points on the graph and just reading off the coordinator. That's all we're doing. Just easy marks in the exam. Right, so you're all doing good, man. Alright, like a boss. So you're going to read off the maximum point here. The maximum point on this graph is this. This is the maximum point. So you're reading off that coordinate. You're going to read off my x value, which is 1, and my y value here, which is 3. So it is 1, 3. It's written as a coordinate, right? The next thing they can ask you, we're talking about a maximum point here, right? So what is the maximum value of f of x, right? So the function here is minus x squared plus 2x plus 2. So what is the maximum value of f of x? Alright, so I see most of you all saying 3. Yep, so my maximum value, right? So the maximum value in this case here, or the highest value, right, is actually 3. So my maximum value of f of x is equal to 3, right? That's my maximum value. The next thing that I want from you all, I want you all to tell me what is the equation for the axis of symmetry. Right? What is the equation for the axis of symmetry? Alright, so you all seem to be getting this, right? So my axis of symmetry, it has to be written as an equation, right? So this line here that I'm drawing vertically is my axis of symmetry, right? This is my axis of symmetry because if I fold the graph along that line, then it will line up exactly. The left and right side will line up exactly. And my axis of symmetry is this point here. So therefore my equation for my axis of symmetry is x is equal to 1, right? That's my axis of symmetry, right? So you all are correct. That's my axis of symmetry. Now, the next part now, I want you to use the equation. So we're going to use the graph, to solve. And in this case, the equation is minus x squared plus 2x plus 2 is equal to 0. I want you to use the graph to solve that equation. So be careful with this one. The question before worked out nicely, but let's see what you get for this one. Let me see what answers you all come up with. Just to make sure you all seeing, this is my y-axis here, and my x-axis is this here, which is this line. This line here is my x-axis. Alright, so I'm seeing some different answers. Alright, so first thing you need to remember, how do we solve this? Since you've already drawn the graph, or your graph is already drawn for you, so this graph is already drawn, right? So what we need to do, we need to find where the x-axis is. That's this line here, this horizontal line here is my x-axis. So my solution to the equation will be this point here, that's this point here, right? As this point, and also this point here, right? So I've seen some of you all say -1 and 3. That's my x-axis is not there. You have to look at the graph. So my solutions will be, let's look at the first solution. The first solution is across here, right? Now you all need to be able to read this off. Now from this point here to this point here, that is 0 to -1, right? Which means every marker represents 0.2, right? So therefore x is equal to minus 0.8, 0.2, 0.4, 0.6. Yeah, so x is equal to minus 0.8, right? I know it might be a little difficult to read off on the screen, right? But make sure you understand where I'm reading it off. And the second value is x is equal to, we're looking at this point here, which is, that's 2.246, that's around 2.8. So this is 2.8, right? So it's a matter of reading off these points on the graph, right? All right, so let me ask, alright, so the only person who actually came close was Dell, who said minus 0.8 and 2.9, right? So seeing this guy, Killer Bean, he's saying no. You see, let me see, what did you put for your answer? When you have to solve an equation like this, right? You've already plotted, this graph here is already plotted for you, right? And we put in that equal to 0. My x-axis is also the line y equal to 0, right? So what I need to do, I need to look at my x-axis. This is my x-axis here. This line is my x-axis. So what you are trying to do is to find out where does the x-axis, right? This is the x-axis. Where does the x-axis cut the graph? This graph here, the curve that you see, that's the function. So it cuts the function at this point here and at this point. So all you're doing is reading off those values from the graph. That's all you're doing. So if I look at it, when I read out the values, I get x equal minus 0.8 on the left hand side, that's this one. And it also cuts at 2.8, right? So my solutions, I have two values, that's this and this. Those are my two solutions to this equation here. All right. All right. So just give me a sec. All right, so I won't jump to, there's something else we looked at. What is a quadratic function? We looked at determining if the quadratic function is going to have a maximum or a minimum value by looking at the coefficient of x squared. So you know what a coefficient is. Look at what is the axis of symmetry, and if they ask us in the exam, what we're going to tell them. And the last thing we looked at is how to solve a quadratic using the graph, right? So solving a quadratic using a graph, we essentially need to determine where the graph cuts my x-axis, right? So that's going to be it for today's class, right? So for those of you interested in joining the class, you can send me a WhatsApp at 868-789 784. Yeah, you can send me a WhatsApp at 784-2059, right? So in this case here, well, you know I'm from Trinidad, right? Alright, so those of you interested in the Form 4 class, you can send me a WhatsApp and I'll send you the details. Right? Those of you in my class, I will send you the work that you need to complete for me. Alright, basically everything we do in class, we have to practice it on my website. Right? So you guys be safe and I will see you all next week. Right? So take care.